Hey guys, so I ended up seeing Godzilla -1 a few days ago, and because the movie's not coming out in the West for about a month, I think for most countries in the West, being, pretty nice thing to do a review of the movie, give my thoughts about it. I am going to be doing a spoiler review here. I feel like it's just the best way for me to be able to explain the movie, explain what I got out of the movie, explain how I felt about the movie, instead of just going through sort of a spoiler-free review of it. So I really like this movie a lot. I think as somebody who's seen not every single Godzilla movie, but a lot of them, I'd say 90% of Godzilla movies, all the main ones, all the important ones I've seen. It's definitely, I think, at the very least in my top 3. If I had to pick, I never like comparing sort of like any Godzilla movie to the original, just because the times are different. It holds a different context in terms of a society, and I just feel like it's not really fair considering how long ago the original movie was. I mean, this is the 70th anniversary, basically it's the 69th anniversary, but it's basically the 70th anniversary of this franchise existing. And I think to compare this movie to the original, it would be kind of weird, because this is also supposed to serve as like a celebration of the character and the franchise as a whole after 70 years. But this is up there. I mean, this is number 2, if not just straight up number 1 in terms of my favorite Godzilla movies that I've seen. We have some of the like IMDb ratings here. I got a lot of 10s, I got a few 9s, 8, 7s, and then sort of tapers down here. Looks like overall it had a 7.8. Now, if it were me, I would definitely rate this higher than a 7.8. I'd have it at a 9 or a 10. I'd probably straight up give it a 10. I was really excited about this going into it. So I had pretty high expectations for the movie, and I think it actually did deliver on pretty much every single front that I could possibly rate it on. So again, I've warned you guys about spoilers. If you don't want to be spoiled for this movie, I would suggest that you click off the video now, because we're going to go into spoilers here. I think the best way for me to do a review about this movie, and I think the easiest way for me to sort of explain the plot and to give some extra details as well, is to actually just go through the Wikipedia plot summary here, and we'll read through this together, and I'll give supplementary information that's not listed on Wikipedia, because I feel like there's a decent amount that they probably have left out of this that I can fill in with a bit here, but we will see here what they say. So I'm going to go through the plot here. We're going to go through what happens in the movie. Again, very heavy, literally spoiling the entire movie, but it is what it is. All right, so let's go ahead and check what they say here. So in 1945, at the end of World War II, Koichi Shikishima, a kamikaze pilot, feigns technical issues with his plane and lands on Odo Island. Okay. Yeah, so the movie essentially opens, and with this guy lands his plane. Like, it literally opens with this pilot landing his plane on Odo Island, or whatever the island is called. Now, it says he feigns technical issues with the plane. So this is a kamikaze pilot, or as they call it, in Japanese, they call it a toko, which is like a special attack or special forces. Essentially a pilot that is sent to death, to kill themselves, to inflict damage, in the way that kamikaze pilots do. And so what happens was he just gets, he doesn't want to kill himself, obviously. And he goes back and basically just makes up a lie that he had technical issues with his plane. Obviously, there's a lot more details regarding this later on. We find out that his family has instructed him numerous times, like, please just come back alive. They write him letters and stuff like that. He has pictures of his family. So, I mean, this is a very emotionally driven plot throughout this movie here. Godzilla appears during the night and attacks the island, killing everybody except Koichi and the lead mechanic, Sousaku Tachibana. Okay, so I mean, there's a few things I left out here. So the first thing to mention, which is pretty interesting, is the way that you know that this Godzilla is approaching is there are dead fish, these deep sea fish that just like float to the surface to indicate that Godzilla is coming. They don't ever really explain. I mean, there's a few days now that I saw this, but I don't think they explain why technically this happens. But I'm assuming it's because he's giving off some kind of radiation that kills anything that's like sort of like close to him. And so when he passes by these fish that he's swimming by, the fish just die and they float up. And that's how you know that Godzilla's coming. And that happens multiple times throughout the movie, right? In order to tell that Godzilla is coming, there's dead fish that float to the surface, and we see that throughout the film. And then this first time when Godzilla appears, so this Godzilla appears very fast. So this is the first appearance of Godzilla in the movie. He's actually not nearly as big as he is later on in the movie. And I'll explain that why later too, but this Godzilla appears and just like completely kills everybody except for the main character, who's, the fighter pilot, Shikishima, and then Tachibana, who's the mechanic, who appears later on as well. Everybody on the island is killed. Godzilla destroys absolutely everything. And basically, Shikishima, who's the main, I'll just call him the main character. Main character is reprimanded by Tachibana because Tachibana says, there was a plane like sitting on like sort of a runway-ish area. And he says, go to the plane. There's guns on the plane. Like you could fire the guns from the. It was a fighter jet or whatever it was. And he could have shot Godzilla from the plane. And this is not like a super mega like building level tall Godzilla. This is, a 3-story tall Godzilla. He's not that big. So you could have had a decent shot of killing him there if he actually shot him in the plane. He actually does run out to go to the plane, and he decides to get. I don't know, he gets too scared and he doesn't shoot him or whatever. And so what happens is he just runs away, and then he gets knocked out, and he wakes up the next day and everybody's dead. That's what happens. In 1946, following his return to Tokyo, Koichi is plagued by survivor's guilt. Yeah, this is a very, very big theme throughout this movie. He started a relationship with Noriko Oishi, and they have adopted a child whose parents were lost in the bombing of Tokyo during World War II. Yes, you guys know the history here. The U.S. firebombed Tokyo during World War II. I think it was in 1945. And it was a very, very brutal bombing. Like, essentially the entire city got completely destroyed. I mean, they do a good job in this movie representing the actual landscape of the city post-bombing. It's basically a slum. Like, they're living in essentially a slum that, slowly over time gets rebuilt back up, but it's a pretty dreary place to live. And that on top of the fact that, people's family were killed. The main character, his parents were killed. His family was killed. There's a woman who he meets up with when he first comes back who says her child was killed. And a lot of the blame gets put on him because of his, he was supposed to be the kamikaze pilot. His role and his, sort of government ordained position in society was to die. Like, his role in society was to die for the country. Even though, at the end of the day, it wouldn't have made a difference in the outcome. It wouldn't have changed, his family from dying. It wouldn't have changed the woman's child from dying. The fact that he didn't fulfill his role in society meant that he had failed, right? And so a lot of the blame could inadvertently be put onto him because of that. That's a pretty important theme that we see throughout this movie, actually. Sort of these, like, societal roles and the best ways that you can fulfill your societal role. Godzilla is mutated by the Bikini Atoll nuclear tests, and he destroys several U.S. warships before heading for Japan. The United States refuses to aid Japan owing to tensions with the USSR. Yeah, so they have like a sort of, obviously it's not a flashback, but it's sort of like a montage of different, radio recordings. So this part's in English because it's the U.S. Army. Of the U.S. Army doing bomb testing. There's like General MacArthur footage. So they show a bunch of sort of like a montage of them doing like some nuclear tests, some warships, stuff like that. So that's sort of, I guess, how they explain Godzilla going from like a 3-story tall monster to, building level in terms of a building plus level, right? Skyscraper level in terms of how big he was. Working on a mine removal ship. Yeah, so essentially the main character gets a job as a member of the crew that's job is to remove mines from the ocean that are remaining there from the war. So basically what they would do is they would find these mines, and there's a gun on the ship, like this big two-handed gun, and you would go like this or whatever to shoot the mines and explode the mines so you can just clear the ocean up, so that these mines aren't just sitting in the ocean. So he meets with scientist Kenji Noda. Yes, if you guys... I guess this is kind of like this movie's version of Serizawa, but not really. He's a bit different. So this scientist, Kenji Noda, used to be a weapons developer for the army during the war. Let's see what else I say. The mine removal ship's crew are tasked with stopping Godzilla's approach to Japan. Yeah, okay, they're skipping a lot here. So eventually, you know, the main character did enough work with this crew to make enough money to, you know, afford a decently nice home. Again, he settles down with this woman that he met with the child. The child, by the way, is not related to them at all. It's literally just somebody that the woman had adopted, whose parents are assumed to be dead, just because, again, Tokyo is in complete disarray at this point. But they, you know, he makes a good living. He's earning some nice money. They get into a nice house. They settle down. They're still not married or anything, but that's just how the dynamic is. And then one day they're out on the ocean with the ship, and this is post sort of like the rumors about the ship, the U.S. ship, right? And then they see this gigantic U.S. ship that is just completely destroyed. I think this was actually in one of the trailers. This gigantic U.S. ship is completely destroyed out in the middle of the ocean, where they're, you know, doing these the mine removals. And then you start seeing the dead fish, you know, floating up to the surface, and then at that point you know that Godzilla's there. And so Godzilla appears, and they do their best to try and like avoid him. They actually have mines that they try and use to like blow up in his face to, like, you know, deter him or make him go away. Let's see what else they say here. They release a mine. Yeah, here we go. They release a mine into Godzilla's mouth and detonate it, but Godzilla regenerates from his injury. So when it says regenerates from his injury, it literally means regenerates like instantly. So they blow up this mine, like, and we're not talking about a mine like this big. Like, this is a big, like, spiked ball mine. Like, it's a giant thing, right? They actually manage to get this into his mouth, and they shoot it, and it explodes, and, you know, the dust sort of clears, and Godzilla's face, like half of his face, is sort of just blown off. But then you just see him regenerate it all. Like, it's almost like Majin Buu regenerating after an injury. It's basically what it is. So that is probably one of the defining, you know, traits that they wanted to give to this Godzilla. A lot of Godzillas have certain unique qualities. That's certainly this Godzilla's unique quality. Then we have the ship Takao arrive. So they have the ship that came from Singapore, I think is where it was. This gigantic ship, like it's a massive warship. Like we're talking about like battleship, like tanker level. And so it comes and they start firing these like gigantic cannons and missiles off into Godzilla. And it, you know, it seems like it's actually doing some damage to him, and he's roaring in pain and stuff like that. Godzilla, so let's just see what it says, but it's subsequently destroyed when Godzilla unleashes his atomic breath. So what Godzilla does is he goes underneath the ship. Well, I guess the first thing he does is he sort of just like comes on top of the ship and just like slams it. Then what he does is he goes underneath the ship, and then he just blasts the atomic breath up. You don't actually get to see this, like the actual action of the atomic breath. All you see is this blue light appear from under the ship, and then it just explodes upwards, and the entire ship is destroyed. And at that point, you know, the main character and the rest of the crew members of that small boat are like, okay, we're getting out of here, and they just start going way. They go back to Tokyo. They're like, we're out of here. Okay, and at that point, I think Godzilla just like goes on to goes his own way or something like that. Koichi tells Noriko about Godzilla's attack, expressing his survivor's guilt to her. Godzilla makes landfall, attacking Ginza in Tokyo. Yeah, so Ginza is like the main area of Tokyo at this point in history. And this is, I think this is, not even I think, but this is easily my favorite part of this movie. You have Godzilla appearing at, you know, in Ginza in Tokyo, and then you have the Ifukube score from the original Godzilla movie playing, and it just, this is easily the best part of the movie. When Godzilla is just laying waste to Ginza in Tokyo. It's yeah. Noriko witnesses the attack while Koichi attempts to rescue her. Meanwhile, the Japanese military engages Godzilla. Godzilla fires his atomic breath, which decimates Tokyo and seemingly kills Noriko. So at this point, we should probably talk about the atomic breath, because I don't think they showed the actual atomic breath itself in any of the trailers. I would actually say that this is probably the single most devastating version of the atomic breath we've ever seen. Like, Shin Godzilla was pretty crazy. This is a different level altogether. So I think this part they showed when he's charging it up, and like his spines, his on the back of his on his back, you know, leading from his tail all the way up to his head. Obviously, they turn blue, like as we typically see with Godzilla, but they protrude from the back, so they actually pop out as the blue light is going up from his tail all the way up. The spikes go like this. It's like ding, 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 and it goes all the way up to the top. And then the actual atomic breath, instead of it being like this beam, it's more so just a blast, if you guys can understand what I'm trying to say. This atomic breath is basically just an atomic bomb. It's what it is. Like, Godzilla shoots his atomic breath out, and it literally creates a mushroom cloud. And it's like, it's hard to really explain this without you guys seeing this in person, but I'll do my best here. He does the atomic breath, it creates this gigantic explosion, mushroom cloud explosion. There's no sound because when it hits, it's so devastating that it just completely clears all sound away for like a few seconds. And then you see this gigantic rush, just this huge shockwave pushes everything back. And basically the entirety of Ginza is completely decimated in just one blast from Godzilla's atomic breath. And it's interesting because I don't know, scientifically, I don't know how this works, but he does the atomic breath. There's a huge shockwave out, but then it's so strong, there's like a recoil, and it shoots it back in. So it sort of like sucks things back into the direction of where the blast hit. And the main character, of course, is trying to save his, not his wife, but, you know, Noriko. And so he goes to hide behind like a building or something, which somehow didn't get destroyed, you know, plot armor or whatever. And then he looks back, and then obviously everything is just completely gone. So she's presumed to be dead. But, yeah. So Kenji comes up with a plan to kill Godzilla, although the Japanese government refuses to help, leaving it up to the civilians and naval veterans to enact it. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty accurate. It's nothing really much else to add there. Koichi recruits Tachibana to repair a damaged plane that they need, in which Koichi will fly the plane into Godzilla's mouth and destroy him from the inside. Yeah, so this was a pretty emotional scene too, where he goes to recruit Tachibana, because remember, Tachibana was the person on the island in the beginning of the movie that saw how cowardly Koichi was, and basically just reprimanded him for, number one, abandoning his duty as a kamikaze pilot, but then also number two, he was the one who told Koichi to go into the plane and shoot Godzilla when he was there. And Koichi goes to the plane, sits in the cockpit, and is about to shoot him, and just decides not to, because I guess he's too scared or whatever it was. So, like, Koichi trying to essentially, I guess, persuade Tachibana to help with this, you know, was a pretty emotional scene. And basically the way it culminated was Koichi, throughout the entire movie, is basically going through, I guess we could just call it PTSD. He sees dreams of Godzilla killing people, you know, regret that he has throughout the course of his time as a kamikaze pilot and just throughout the war in general. And so all of this regret and all of this, I guess, unfulfilled duty that he had as part of the Japanese army. And the way that he phrases it is, "My war is not over." And he says that same line to Tachibana when he's trying to recruit him for, you know, to sort of repair the plane and help him finish things. He's like, "Your war is not over either, is it?" And they're sort of in the same bucket because they both survived the attack on the island. They're both survivors of the war. And so they both have this sort of bond that they can use to relate to each other more than pretty much anyone else can. So that's the way he sort of persuades Tachibana to help out. Meanwhile, Kenji plots to destroy Godzilla by sinking him to a depth of 1,500 meters. Yeah, so the way that they were going to do this is they were going to use Godzilla. So the way they were going to lure him out into the ocean is they were going to use his voice. They have like these speakers underwater, and they had like recordings of Godzilla's voice, and they used his voice to like lure him out into the ocean, into the area where they designated this to happen. And they were going to take like just tons of gas. I forget what kind of gas it was, but again, it was a few days ago when I saw the movie. But they were going to take some kind of gas and shoot it upwards or whatever it was to sink Godzilla down to like a super deep level. It says 1,500 meters, so that's, yeah, whatever. and they were going to try and just kill him via the water pressure. That was their initial plan. And then it says, should the plan fail, then they have balloons that would inflate under Godzilla, which would bring him back up to the surface, and then they try and kill him via... It's like the same... I don't know what the technical term is, but it's the same... it's the same thing that, like, if you're scuba diving, you don't want to just, like, you know, shoot, like, rocket up to the surface, because you would die from whatever the force is that you know, kills you or whatever. I think it's just, like, the change in pressure being too rapid too quickly. Balloons would inflate under Godzilla to force him back into the surface, killing him through explosive decompression. I guess that's what it's called. So yeah, that was their plan, essentially. And then they had not Tachibana, Koichi as the pilot, who would sort of be distracting Godzilla as this was happening. So they skipped a big part here, actually. Hold on, let me scroll down here. They skipped a pretty big part here. So before we get to this next paragraph right here, they actually account for Godzilla's atomic breath. And what they do is they create a decoy ship. So where Godzilla, you know, fires up his atomic breath, again, it takes a bit to charge it up, and shoots this decoy ship. And then after he shoots his atomic breath, they you know, surmise that he's not going to be able to use it for at least a little bit, and that will give them the opportunity to get the gas ready to sink him down. So that's a pretty important thing that they didn't mention in this synopsis here, but they do use a decoy ship to take the brunt of the atomic breath from Godzilla, and then while he's sort of like recharging or, you know, in relaxing mode or whatever, they'll come in and sink him down, and that's how they accomplish that. So Godzilla is dragged down to 1,500 meters, but survives. Yeah, honestly, it doesn't even seem like he was fazed by it at all. The balloons are activated, forcing Godzilla up to 800 meters, but he manages to break free. Yeah, so obviously, yeah, shocking. Who would have thought that like a bunch of flotation devices would not be able to lift a multiple building-sized creature? Two ships try to haul Godzilla to the surface, but don't have enough power to do so. Yeah, it's like... Dude, they have like these two, you know, decently sized ships with these cranes trying to lift them out of the water, and it's like, come on. But then they get help from a bunch of other boats that come out to lend their assistance, and Godzilla is brought to the surface, injuring him but not killing him. Enraged, Godzilla prepares to destroy all of the ships. Yeah, so he starts firing, he starts charging up another atomic breath, and obviously they didn't account for this. They thought that, you know, either lowering him down or lifting him up would kill him. And so at this point, they're sort of like out of options. They have no other way to deal with this. But Koichi worked with Tachibana to sort of get this plane in order. You don't actually know this. Actually, I'm not even going to say this yet, but let's just keep reading. Koichi flies his plane into Godzilla's mouth, destroying Godzilla's head. Before he reaches Godzilla, Koichi ejects from the plane. So you don't actually know until after the plane hits Godzilla, and like, so basically Godzilla's charging his atomic breath, his mouth is open, he's about to fire it off, and then the plane just boom, just shoots right into his mouth, and then his head gets like mangled and stuff like that. You don't know about the ejector seat until after the plane hits, and then people look up and they just see him, you know, parachuting down. And then it flashes back to a discussion that Koichi has with Tachibana, where they're trying to, you know, get the plane ready for the mission. And you know, Tachibana says, you know, you should live, right? You don't have to die here. Like, we can make this work as an ejector plane. And so I think that's a pretty good contrast with basically the message of the entire movie up until this point, which was that, you know, you should be playing to your role in society. Your designated role should be played out to the fullest of its extent, and that's the only way you're able to really secure, you know, your position in society, in terms of, especially Japan, that has this very traditional outlook on roles, right? But this is sort of a different outlook on that, where, you know, Tachibana, who is someone who was mad at, you know, Koichi in the beginning of the movie for not, you know, fulfilling his duty as a kamikaze pilot. Then he was mad at him for not shooting Godzilla later on. He was, you know, basically just essentially blamed him that everybody died on the island there. But now he's, you know, he's telling him, like, you know, this is how the ejector seat works. There's no reason for you to just wildly kill yourself for no reason. Like, even though it was your role as a kamikaze pilot to do that earlier on, maybe it's wrong. That's essentially what this means, right? The fact that he lives this. Okay, so they don't even explain. Oh, they do explain. Godzilla's body is destroyed by the atomic breath he was charging when Koichi's plane struck him. Yeah, so basically what this looks like is his plane smashes into his head, and then the atomic breath, which was like in the process of being charged up, basically explodes from within Godzilla's body. Right? It's hard to. It's like there's a beam of light that comes out here. There's a beam of light that comes out here. There's a beam of light that comes out here, and then it just like basically almost crumples like a cookie. His body does. And then there's well, let's just read it. Back at port, Koichi receives a telegram and he heads to hospital where Noriko is waiting for him, having survived Godzilla's rampage in Tokyo. Yeah, honestly, I don't really know if that was necessary to have her survive that, because it seems pretty unrealistic that she would have lived that, considering how ridiculous that like explosion was. And then it says, meanwhile, a chunk of Godzilla's remaining flesh sinks to the bottom of the ocean and begins to regenerate. It's hard to really tell what part of Godzilla that was. To me, it looked like it was his heart. But it could have been something else, and it was just, I mean, you could tell it was regenerating. So, I mean, that obviously is going to play some sort of a factor if they do decide to make a sequel to this. But that is essentially the movie here. Yeah, they did a decent job of summarizing this, but, like, you're not going to be able to just read the plot here and really understand the amount of detail that goes into the movie. The set is a major part of this. Japan as a whole post-war. Tokyo was just in complete ruin essentially after the fire bombings. You have a lot of the movies set in the ocean, obviously, with Godzilla being the main point here. A lot of it is, you know, not your traditional giant monster movie either. There's a lot of different interpretations you could have about this movie too. It's, you know, it could be simply about PTSD. It could be about, you know, I think a lot of this movie is probably going to be interpreted differently for people who understand Japanese culture in terms of societal role, sort of like endowment in society here, and how it might not always be the best choice to, you know, sort of blindly follow what society has set out, you know, and carve the path for you. Maybe you should carve your own path. So there's a lot of those like subplots that are going on throughout this movie, and I think a lot of that actually does work very, very well. The actors, I think, was, you know, they played their roles really well. Something I got a lot of questions about, and then we'll sort of wrap up after this, was the CGI. Now, this movie, a lot of people, especially in the West, are going to look at this movie and compare this to, like, you know, the MonsterVerse films, the legendary Godzilla movies with Godzilla vs. Kong. We have the upcoming movie Godzilla and Kong, I think is what it's called, or something like that. We have King of the Monsters. What is the budget of this movie? Does it even say? $15 million was the budget of this movie. Like, give me 1 second here. All right, so we have Godzilla 2014. What was the budget here? $160 million budget here. Okay. Now we have Godzilla King of the Monsters. This one was 170 to 200 million. Now we have Godzilla vs. Kong, which was 155 to 200 million. And then here we have with -1, which is 15 million. So I mean, it's just not gonna look nearly as good as, like, you know, in terms of just the quality of like CGI, the grand scale of like just these ridiculous explosions and, you know, buildings falling down and all these different sets being destroyed. Like, this movie does a really good job with the resources that they had available to them in terms of making this feel like a really big tragedy and just a, you know, essentially a cataclysm for the country. And I think Godzilla's destruction of Ginza, again, that was my favorite part of the movie, that whole scene of him, you know, making landfall, and then the Ifukube score starts, and then he's doing the atomic breath for the first time that you can see. Everything's getting completely leveled and destroyed, and there's this feeling of hopelessness. And so I think the way that they were able to do that on such a low budget, again, it's not going to look as good as the MonsterVerse movies. And I know this is going to be something that people are going to be comparing the movie to, because, you know, it's still a Godzilla movie. And I think it's fair to even, I do think it is fair to compare this to the MonsterVerse films, but you have to understand that this is not Hollywood. This is not, you know, let's just throw hundreds of millions of dollars at this and get like these ridiculous effects in here. So in terms of effects, it is not living up to the MonsterVerse films, right? These movies are going to look better, right? The King of the Monsters, Godzilla vs. Kong, and then Godzilla 2014, like these are going to look better naturally than Godzilla -1. There are a few instances where the CGI might look a little bit strange. I think there was like maybe one, like I'm not really somebody that really cares that much about that. Like I'm not going to be like pausing at every other frame and be like, oh, there's a weird, there's a weird frame here. Like I don't really care that much. There was like one scene where there were some reporters on the roof of a building, and they were looking at Godzilla like sort of do stuff, and it sort of looked a little strange. But other than that, I don't really particularly look at any of the CGI throughout the movie, and I'm like, this doesn't look that good. Like there weren't really any moments like that for me. So that's really all I'll have to say about that. And then lastly, in terms of the design of Godzilla for this one, I like to think of this Godzilla as a mixture between Godzilla 2000 and Shin Godzilla. Right, this is what this Godzilla looks like. This is sort of like the best, just like, neutral position -1 Godzilla that I could find here. He kind of does look like this Godzilla, right? Godzilla 2000 is just like the classic Heisei design here. But he's got some qualities of Shin Godzilla, I think. The smaller arms, his skin definitely looks a lot rougher and almost sort of like it's made of like rock in a way, which is definitely the vibe I get from Shin Godzilla. So I guess it's kind of like a fusion between, sort of like the traditional design for Godzilla and the Shin Godzilla design. That's really the way I see it here. But overall, I really did like this movie a lot. There are a lot of different interpretations you can have about this movie. I think there's a much deeper aspect to this movie. And this is definitely an area where I see this movie prevailing over the MonsterVerse films, is there is a much deeper meaning and a deeper aspect to this movie than there are for the MonsterVerse films. Even though the MonsterVerse films are going to be, quote unquote, better monster movies, they're prettier looking. The effects, I think, are just more polished because of all the money they put into it. But in terms of this movie being a work of art, I do think it outclasses the MonsterVerse movies. And I'm a big fan of the MonsterVerse movies. I do like them a lot. I like Shin Godzilla a lot. I would actually have this movie above Shin Godzilla if it were up to me and I had to rank, which one was better. But yeah, really, really good movie. I would give it a 9 or a 10 out of 10. I think it's exceptionally good. If you guys have seen the movie, if you guys have been able to get your hands on tickets and see the movie in Japan, let me know down below what you guys thought of it. Are you excited for the movie? Let me know. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one.